I just want to thank you for agreeing to meet with me today, Mr. T. I've been having some concerns in my classroom regarding the educational gap of my children. This caused me to start doing some evidence-based practice research to come up with a way to reduce the gap. My findings are extremely interesting, and I think that they will not only benefit my students, but all the other students in the school. This evidence-based practice is called RTI, which I believe to be the key to unlocking the success of all students. So let's talk about the real talk about intervention. RTI stands for Response to Intervention. There are 3 different tiers, and these tiers help students meet their academic and behavioral goals. The tiers are based on the student's ability and performance. The first tier would be our basic classroom, what we see every day and what we already have implemented here at the school. This is where the majority of the students are meeting their goals, which is about 80%, and this is also where the whole school expectations are set. Students learn at a roughly grade level, and they're less likely to fall behind and need interventions compared to their peers. Learning is also based in the original lesson plan that a teacher has set for their students. However, it also has 2 other tiers. The second tier is an area where students that are struggling in class might fall into. This will be about 15% of our students. And they might need help or interventions or services that they can't get because they don't have a disability. But if they got those interventions through us, they would be able to meet their academic goals just like their peers in the Tier 1 level. But then we have the students in Tier 3 that are not benefiting from the interventions in the Tier 2. And so they need some extra assistance, and these students might actually qualify for special education. So it will give us an idea of which students might actually need to be tested for special education and which students, if they just have a slight intervention, may never need to be in special education. So if you look at it this way, we could also reduce the amount of students that we're pushing into the special ed department. From there, you might wonder, well, how are we going to access this? How are we going to determine who needs these interventions and who doesn't, and how are we going to determine if the interventions are working? So this is how we do it. First, we have universal screening. So this is a check at different times of the year, such as fall, winter, and spring, and these will check to see if the interventions are working or not. If we decide that a student needs interventions and they start using the interventions and we notice a rise in their score from the fall to the winter, then we can guess that the interventions that we've put in place are actually helping the student. You might think, well, that's a long time, fall to winter, that could take several hours, several amounts of money. Well, I can actually do this in my classroom as well. So on a weekly basis, I could run, say, a reading fluency test, and if a student is in the second tier and I have provided them with an intervention and I've noticed every week that their scores keep increasing, I can relate this back to the intervention that we provided them. If we notice that the scores are staying the same or decreasing, we might say, ooh, they might need Tier 3 help, which means they might need some one-on-one assistance, or maybe they even need to be tested if the parents agree to it. Next, you might be wondering, well, you said this is evidence-based practice, but what do you really mean by evidence-based practice? Well, RTI is an evidence-based practice related to interventions, and each tier is based on evidence-based practice. Therefore, it makes everything based on evidence. So, first off, it's very noted that working in groups can sometimes help students. It provides that one-on-one, and that's a form of evidence-based practice which we use here. They also use different kind of self-monitoring tools that could be considered evidence-based practice as well. So by implementing this in the classroom, we're just bundling up a whole bunch of goodness in evidence-based practice, and we are adding it to our classrooms. So how can this apply in some of our classrooms, and how is it going to cost the school? How are we going to fund it? Things of that nature. So how to apply it in the classroom? First, it'll help us notice the struggling students from the on-track students. So even if we aren't providing the interventions that RTI suggests, we can at least notice, oh, this person might need a little extra help. They might need a little extra one-on-one. They might need some time alone with the teacher, or maybe even a paraprofessional, or even time in the resource room. It also reminds us that differential learning is key to all students, no matter if the student is high achieving, such as being gifted, or if that student is low achieving and not meeting their goals. So we need to take in consideration that learning styles might be the problem here. We also need to take in consideration, is the child being engaged and is it interactive for them? Because if we're not meeting those needs of the students, then they're not going to learn, and RTI can give us those intervention issues that we may have. Also, in our classroom, we can implement with RTI tier time to help all students in small groups. So the students that are in Tier 2 and Tier 3 could go off in small groups that the teacher can work with to improve their knowledge, to improve their skills, and to hopefully meet those educational goals and hopefully get back to where they want to be. And lastly, it helps understand and use evidence-based practice. I know a lot of teachers struggle with what is evidence-based practice and how can we use it. If we use RTI in the school, it will help us gain more knowledge on evidence-based practice, how to use it, and why it is important. So how much is this going to cost, right? Well, and how are we going to train the teachers? Nowadays, most teachers are actually being trained in college. For instance, I took a Special Ed 371 course, which trained me in how to use RTI and why RTI is important. Secondly, funding, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be you hire an extra paraprofessional. One school teacher can honestly do tier time with their students. Would a paraprofessional help someone that can bounce from class to class? Yes, but can one teacher do it? They could. It would just be some work. Another fun thing about funding is you don't have to go out and buy materials, and you aren't forced to buy the materials. We are supposed to give students an appropriate education, but this isn't binding in any way. So if we don't have the money to fund it, then we don't, and we come up with a free and alternative way in order to help the students meet their goals. Lastly, if we have a Title I student, we can already get those goals within the federal funding through Title I. So, my question for you is, we have decisions to make, and in our RTI, we also make decisions. So our first goal in RTI is to help students that are struggling catch up to their peers. So signs of improvement can be a gap closing. It can also be a predictable range of when a student is going to actually meet back up with their peers, and it will continue until they hit the benchmark, and then we can start slowly fading out the intervention until they're doing it independently. Our second goal of RTI is to find children struggling early on so they're not struggling throughout their whole school experience. So signs of this could be signs of drowning is a widening gap where there is no closure, and an increase in intensity of intervention could help this, or an alteration to the intervention could also help. If that doesn't work, then that's when we might suggest possible testing if the parent is interested in that. So RTI has decisions to make, and now you have the decision to make. Are you going to give the key that could open up a whole bunch of doors to students when it comes to success, or are you going to keep all those doors locked away from students? It's your choice. So think about it.